You want to take a ride? You're listening to Dark Matter Radio with your host, Ronnie McLean. Where we come to find that we're living with no boundaries, all things are possible, and that we are in an infinite universe. Welcome to Dark Matter Radio with your host, Ronnie McLean. Once again, we are here, and no matter where you are on this beautiful land of ours, whether you're in Europe, whether you're in India, Africa, whether you're in Asia, whether you are in Russia now as well, whether you are in somewhere in Europe, Britain, Scandinavia, Germany, whether you are in South America, Jamaica, hello my friends out there, my beautiful Haitian people, how are you? Dominican Republic, beautiful, beautiful, beautiful people out there. Aruba, and we even had some listeners in Cuba now. Also some people over there in Mexico. And we're rounding ourselves up to our hat of Canada. Lovely, beautiful place. Got to get up there and take a look at some of that beautiful, beautiful scenery up there. Also take a look at the scenery over here in America for all you beautiful people over there. But, you know, tonight we are talking about the Black Civil War. Why are we at war with one another? Now we're at war at social media. You're seeing mountains and mountains and mountains of people just attacking one another. And we're all in the same boat, but we're attacking one another. There is no sense of unification. Why can't we come together? Everybody talks about it, coming together. We're going to come together. We're going to unify. We're going to unify. And what do we get? We get absolutely nothing every single time. There is absolutely nothing out there that is unifying the people. I mean, there is certain things that we have to do, and that's what we're going to discuss in this episode. We're going to discuss about the 4 things that are needed to end the Black Civil War first, and then for us as a people to reestablish ourselves on our land, and we'll get into what is a foreigner. What isn't a foreigner? Who should we really be fighting against? Is it one another as we're trying to dig out of this deep hole and trying to end this war? Or is it somebody else? Well, so we talked about a lot of stuff, right? We talked about the Hebrew Israelites, right? The major players that are in this game. We talked about them. We talked about the Moors. We talked about Numan Menkare's area over there, the Bright race. We talked about them. We talked about the other people there that are just sitting around, just waiting for things to happen so that they can get in there and jump in there and put on whatever they're going to put on next, because they're not sure who's going to win out. We talked about the African Americans, right? The black people, the so-called Negroes, etc. We talked about all of them. We also talked about the indigenous, right? The indigenous movement that's going on there. And then, you know, we have a few different groups inside of the indigenous movement. They're fighting against one another. People fighting over land and all that other type stuff. But like I told you a long time ago, long time ago, especially when this show just started, I mean, I was saying back in the 90s that there is going to be reparations, right? There is going to be some sort of a decolonization situation. And just like in the 60s, you know, those wait around people waiting for all this stuff to happen, so then that way they can put out their dashikis on or feather in their head, right? Or feather in their cap. Next thing you know, the Aboriginals again, right? Or, you know, if the African movement takes flight, then they'll go back wearing their dashikis or whatever is, you know, a lot of these people over in the African American community are going to be doing. They're going to be trying to spread the word and try to get everybody else to do what they're doing so that they can try to cash in on all the money. Right? And as you can see right now, we're also fighting against the U.S. government. And when we're fighting against the U.S. government, you're starting to see now that they're starting to talk about all kinds of stuff in terms of us, you know, giving us, you know, reparations. Reparations, it's going to be a major play in this year's election. Major play in this year's election. right? Don't think it's not. And then you're going to really see the fireworks happen between the African Americans, between the Moors, between the Hebrew Israelites, between the different fractions in each of these groups, between the Aboriginals and the fractions in there, right? I mean, you think what's going on the internet right now, and what's going on YouTube and social media is crazy, right? And these YouTube radio programs and stuff like that is crazy. Well, you gotta, it's going to get worse, because there's going to be hundreds of millions of dollars out there at stake. And like they did, back in the late 80s and the early 90s, when they came up with this sustainable government bullshit, excuse my language, but it was a bunch of crap, all right? And they had a fertilizer company who actually was delivering out the money. That's when I knew that it was garbage and had everything to do with Agenda 21. Sustainable government. That's what it was all about back then. Sustainable government. There's no such thing about sustainable government when your people are getting killed in the street and then you're killing each other. Killing each other like madmen. Talking about each other behind their backs. Trying to prove each other wrong. Going after people. It's ridiculous. It even got into, they got shows where they said they're putting Dane Calloway in his place and he's not even on the show. He's not even on the show. They got shows where they're talking about, so they're talking about all kinds of stuff. I mean, all kinds of things. I haven't heard anybody go after Phoenix. Well, people have gone after Phoenix Moon, actually, which is, again, very unfortunate, because he's another very proud, bright sister who's doing a lot of good things in terms of giving out a lot of information, teaching a lot of things, and very, very instrumental in terms of getting that kind of voice out. But you got Young Fowl out there, against Sean Nader, those kinds of things. I mean, you got a lot of different types of groups out there that are getting ready to really start fighting for the money. I mean, it's crazy. It's crazy. Another group we didn't talk about was FANA, the Federation of Aboriginal Nations. That's up in the north, up above New York, I believe Rhode Island area up there. Very strong, powerful brothers and stuff like that. I haven't seen them really get mixed up in too much stuff. I was dealing with one of them, also with the Coosa Nation. I think I mentioned them, but they aren't. Doesn't look like they're fighting with anybody. They're mainly fighting with the government. I mean, you got people fighting against yourself, and you got people infighting and stuff like that, and then you got to fight against the government. So, I mean, the Coosa Nations, they're doing a lot of good things. They're doing a lot of things, exhausting all these remedies that have to be done in order for you to go internationally, for people to be able to listen to you, right? So, it's a lot of things that we got going on here that we really have to really take into consideration about what's really what, right? And it's really sad. It's sad that we have a lot of potential, but we're too busy fighting like crabs in a barrel. And how long has that saying been around? That saying's been around for eons, and nothing's changed. Nothing has really changed. And then people wonder why our communities can't get better, why we can't get better schooling, why we don't have better jobs, why we don't have this and why we don't have that. Well, because one thing is that we're too busy fighting and not investing. Too busy fighting and not investing. And yeah, quote unquote black on black crime, that's part of a civil war, fighting against ourselves. There's a lot more people dying in this war now than a lot of the wars that are going out there in the world. We're slaughtering ourselves. And then we're slaughtering ourselves mentally, physically. We don't eat right. We eat a whole bunch of GMO foods. We don't eat electric foods. We eat all kinds of things that are toxic. We got medical war against us. We got a lot of things that are going on. Lots of things, right? And it is very important for us to really understand and have an understanding of what's really going on. So I want to really get into this foreigner situation and then get into the 4 things that really need to be done in terms of what has to happen before we can even begin to start talking about reparations. All right? It's the ending of a war. Right? Before we even get to the ending of a war, while we're trying to end this war, we have to create a fishbone structure all throughout the country in order for us to save ourselves. And then we have to end the war, and then then we have to decolonize, and then we can talk about reparations. So let's get into this whole entire subject and really get into it. And hopefully maybe we might have to part 3 to this and really get into some really specifics in terms of the United Nations Decolonization Act and the Indigenous Rights Act of the Americans and the 1960s Decolonization Act. So yeah, let's get into this and see exactly where we're going. Right? And what I have to tell people is that it really doesn't matter at this point in time. It really doesn't matter as long as you're not a foreigner. Right? So when you look at the Moors, they say they are from Africa. They say they're from Africa. Period. End of story. These people are foreigners. This is the reason why we have to be careful with the new indigenous rights, Aboriginal rights of the world. The UN passed in 2006 or 7, 2008 maybe. And then you have, because what happens is it begins to start lumping all the Aboriginal indigenous people of the world all together, right? Because remember, you can declare yourself to be anything. You have a right to declare yourself to be anything. That's why it was so eloquently pointed out by Phoenix Moon one day that, with the 1968 Civil Rights Act, when it came out, we got our freedom, and then the very next day we started calling ourselves black and African and all the other type of stuff. We disassociated ourselves and lost our rights, right? And lost all of the things that come along with that. Maybe there was a reason for that, I don't know. But a person belonging to a particular place or group, this is what a foreigner is. A person not belonging to a particular place or group, a stranger or outsider. Synonymous, alien, foreign, national, non-native, immigrant, settler, newcomer, stranger, outsider. Now, depending on the brainwashing and how one thinks or what they have their belief systems all about, right, in their life on this planet. If you come out of Africa, then basically everybody's a foreigner, right? If you believe in that out of Africa theory, right? But one of the things that we have to remember that there is no historical fact to the explanation or this concept that they call out of Africa. That's why they call it a theory, because they don't have any proof that goes along with that. Right? They don't have any proof that everybody's come out of Africa. Right? And there's also no real proof, biologists state, and I pointed this out in one of my other videos, how the sun looks at people of the world. There is absolutely no proof for the changings of color in people when they go to colder climates. None whatsoever. In fact, the biologist stated that there is absolutely no reason for the skin color to change at all. So take that into consideration when you're talking about all this other type stuff, right? So with my belief, I believe that, we were always here in North America. North America is the oldest landmass on Earth. The oldest landmass on Earth, right? And I believe that we were here for hundreds of thousands of years, if not millions of years, right? And when you get to the Hebrews, the Hebrew Israelites, I think that they're just confused and they just don't know where they come from, right? Because they're trying to fit in with a whole other society that is not them at all. And in fact, the Jews in Israel are Hyksos people who come from the north and have absolutely no dealings with the Hebrew people at all in terms of race, unless they were mixing with them, and the way that they look, they haven't been mixing much, right? And they kept them pretty much pure. Right, so they were another people who came and writ themselves into history and confused up the whole entire process. And that's the thing about this black war, right? This black civil war that's going on right now with all these different groups spouting all these different things. They're fighting against each other. You're on the radio talking about how, this group is no good and how that group is, is this, that, and the other thing. You better be careful of this group, and you have to be careful of how that group defines themselves with this, which you do have to be careful because it all means a lot of different things. And that's the reason why there are some essential things
that have to happen before we can even begin to start talking about compensation. And you're going to hear a lot more people talking about this compensation. As I told you before, it's going to happen, right? Decolonization in some sort of way is going to happen. And, you know, reparations in some sort of way, recompense is going to happen in some sort of a way, right? But what people aren't talking about is the ending of the war. See, because if the war doesn't end, then there's absolutely no way that you can consider yourself to be free. You're still in a jail supremacist type system underneath the structural abuse, structural violence system that's encapsulating everything. The war has to end. We're still at war, and nobody's really talking about that. So as we're at war with each other, right? Fighting on a battleground that is still occupied by the enemy. And that we're still entrapped and still mentally and physically and economically enslaved by them. And governmentally enslaved by them. Religiously enslaved by them. So when you begin to start looking at this, this is one of the reasons why we are fighting against each other so badly, so hard, and so much. Because we hate the very nature of what we are because of the program that we have in there. The programming that we have. That we can't get out of it. So we're attacking and attacking and attacking. And what we have to do, we have to get above and beyond that programming, come together as beings of people, and this is the first thing that has to happen, and redevelop ourselves in a fishbone network so that way we can have a confederation or a federation. So we have to get ourselves into a confederation. And this, by the very meaning of confederation, means that it is voluntary. It's different from a federation, which is not voluntary. It is purposely done through force. And if you enter into a federation, even if it's under the guiserships of the word confederation, and the war hasn't ended, that means you are being forced to capitulate into the system that is still keeping you prisoner, still keeping you slave, still keeping the war going, because now the war and mental slavery and physical slavery, economic slavery, religious slavery, textbook slavery is still upon you, and any other kind of slavery that you can mention is still upon you. So the difference between a confederation, a real confederation, and a federation is that the confederation is completely voluntary because we all are individuals, right? We all have the ability to decide and choose for ourselves, and as a collective, we come together and make the best decision for us all. But we have to be awake. We have to be awoke. We have to be able to see things in a mindset where you're not mentally compromised. And there is not one person right now in America that is not mentally compromised. Right? And what do I mean by that? We all have this anger. There's an anger that is deep down inside of us about what has happened. Right? We all have some sort of programming that is lingering inside of us about what they have done to us over this 500-year period, if not longer. We have a whole bunch of things and sets of circumstances that have been gathered in us that we need to be able to overcome. And you can only overcome that if you first put in a system of a confederation to be able to bring the means of our own healing to ourselves. So the first thing that has to happen, we have to begin to start a confederation. We have to begin to start putting ourselves together as indigenous nations of North America, right? As the indigenous nations of North America, that doesn't mean that one person is involved. We all are involved. And it doesn't matter if you consider yourself a descendant of African slaves because you've been here part of the whole entire process of all these things going on, or you consider yourself an Aborigine, which means that you've been here before all this stuff was going on, which means that we have a couple of more processes that have to happen in order for us to be able to sidetrack a whole lot of these things. Now, we got to remember, as being a descendant of a slave, of an African slave, there are descendants of African slaves here on this land, right? Which are now part of this diaspora of North America. They're part of the system. They're part of what's been going on, right? And then you have a lot of Africans that were over here even before they did come here. They were caught in the crossfire. And I'm not talking about the Moors. I'm talking about a whole lot of trade and systems and stuff like that that were going on around the world before the Europeans were allowed to come out of the area that they're in and come over here and wreak all the havoc that they wrecked. So you do have a lot of African descendants of slaves and a lot of different types of ways you can put them together, right? But you have to remember that over 500 years, the actual Africans that came over here as slaves are few and far between, considering when you're talking about North America, and I would even put the Caribbean islands in there because the Caribbean islands were part of the North Carolinian trade system, right? And most of the slaves that came into the Caribbean came from North Carolina. So we have to remember that, right? And that's when you begin to start getting into the Caribbean aspect of things. Right? We have to talk about the Caribbean aspect of things because it's very important about those islands. The Taíno, indigenous Caribbean people. The Taíno were an Arawak people who were indigenous people of the Caribbeans and Florida. So they were part of the mainland. At the time of the Europeans' contact in the late 14th century, 15th century, they were the principal inhabitants of most of Cuba, Jamaica, Hispaniola, which is the Dominican Republic and Haiti today, and Puerto Rico. And again, remember, all of these names that they're using are names that they came to replace the original names of what these islands really were called. Because as soon as they came here, they started doing the name change game, right? They were starting it from the very time that they landed. Right? And one of the most profound things I remember studying about what Christopher Columbus said, that he has found the Hesperides, right? And he found the land of paradise. And what a beautiful people these are. They just don't know how unfortunate they are. Meaning that he came over here knowing their intent. They are intended to come over here and slaughter as many people as they can, to destroy what was here. But those are the Caribbean people. So now if you're listening from Jamaica, if you're listening from Puerto Rico, which you should be, if you're listening from Cuba, which you should be, if you're listening from any of the islands that are down here right now, you know exactly where you came from. You are part of the North American diaspora. And you can't get away from it. Right? Because it tells you right there in your own history where you came from. A lot of people down there, I was just down there not too long ago, a lot of people, when I ask them, where are you really from? And they say Africa, and I say, where in Africa are you from? They give you the same look as the North American black person does. They become confused. So this is why we're having this conversation about the Black Civil War that's going on right now, that has been perpetuated with this white supremacist system, so that it can diffuse and break down and tear apart what really needs to happen. And this is why we find ourselves always in conflict, because we're always in conflict with each other. We're in conflict with our relationship. We're in conflict with our children. We're in conflict with our girlfriends and our wives. We're in conflict with our neighborhoods. And this is one of the reasons why we're out there. We're killing each other, killing each other, killing each other. I mean, there's a lot of different reasons why we're killing each other in the streets now today as well, right? Because it's a better way of them getting our body parts than it was when they were going into the hospitals and stealing them. You remember that kid that got killed in his... in that gym, and he was rolled up, and then when they actually really looked at him inside before his funeral, he had tissue paper, I think it was newspaper stuffed all inside of him. God only knows how many people are doing that too, right? A lot of crazy stuff going on, but again, we don't see any of this stuff that's really affecting us, right? So when you begin to start doing something constructive for yourself other than doing something non-constructive, they make sure that that constructive behavior is translated into a way that is going to end up producing no results. And that's what's happening now. No results, because they are going to give you the results. They are going to give you the remedy to your problem, because you're going to be unable to solve it for yourself, because you won't be able to form a confederation, something that is free, natural, what we've been a part of and what we have been a part of. And that's why we call it a reestablishment of the system that we came out of. right? Creating a barrier around us so then that way we can create an economic and a physical barrier around us from the outside world so it can give our people a chance to heal. And God knows we need a chance to heal. Do you know that there's more people on psychotropic drugs today than there ever have been? And in the Americas, North America, they say that there's upwards to 85% of the people on some sort of psychiatric drug, psychotropic drug. And almost this amount of the same people that are on that are going through some sort of psychiatric counseling. The programming that they got us into, the fighting, the infighting that they got us going into. And is it no coincidence that no matter what kind of error we find ourselves in, we always find ourselves in the same type of situation? Non-conformity? Non-being able to come together, to unite, to bring ourselves together as one people, as we should? Do you find it really difficult to understand why you go into a lot of the neighborhoods and they've never gotten better? Unless they are gentrifying them? Do you realize why a lot of people are, so religiously confused, educationally confused? And even though we are in the era and in the time of us being able to think for ourselves, and there's more information that are available to us than ever before in the time of enlightenment, that we find ourselves still walking around in the room with the light, with it being dark. And what I'm trying to tell people, again, if we have to identify foreigner. You have to identify foreigner. And if you consider yourself to be an African coming here into the Americas and you're part of the African-American diaspora, and again, or black, which there is no such race as black, right? There is no such race as African-American. So we have to be careful on how we're lumping ourselves, what you're lumping yourself into. So that's the first thing. We have to begin to start organizing ourselves into smaller units, 12 people or more, becoming an NGO, non-government organization, an NGO, and combining ourselves with other NGOs in a specific way, so then that way we can have a confederation of beings all around this country that we can be able to come together, have a great grand council, and speak as one. That's the first thing that we need to do, because they're formulating that for us right now. That's why they're talking about reparations and bringing up all these different things. They're acting like it's a really hard subject for them, but they already got the remedy already spelled out for you. They're going to get some people who don't believe in a damn thing that you believe in, or it's going to be good for you, and you're going to end up just like the civil rights movement, but even worse, because this is the last time we're going to be able to formulate a remedy. And the only other time we're going to be able to form a remedy of being able to get out of any of this stuff is to change from a carbon-12 to a carbon-7 being, and then whatever's left, that's what's going to be. And we need to try to make as many people be able to make that transition as possible. That's the reason why this is so important. The second thing we have to think about is we have to have the ending of the war. Now, if we have an ending of the war, that means people have to be repatriated to their own land. So any of the Aboriginal people, any of the indigenous people that weren't slaves, that were caught up in this war and that was fighting for their freedom, that were doing all the things, even against what you now call Native Americans, fighting. They were here first. That's who the war was perpetuated against, right? So what has to happen is that there has to be an ending of the war, right? There has to be something that's saying there's an ending of the war. When that is done, then the indigenous Aboriginal people of the land have a right to go back to their land. Right? They have a right to go back to the land. And so that takes care of that whole entire problem. So when they have a right to go back to their land, now they have a right to be free. They have a right to be free out of the system that was causing the war on them. They no longer are in a war type system. They can now be free. So now we can use that. We can use that skeleton that we developed earlier, right? We can use that skeleton that we developed earlier to be able to use that to be able to communicate with each other and be able to begin to start funneling the streams of our own healing to our own people, because now we have a system that is in place. So there has to be ending of the war. Then the next thing has to be decolonization, because they came over here and they colonized everybody. So anybody that was caught up in this slave situation, anybody that was caught up being a prisoner of war and being on this land and all that other type stuff over here, were now decolonized. Right? So when you have that decolonization, what that means is, not only like at the ending of a war do people get repatriated back to their land, but through decolonization, they're forced to have to leave the land. Right? So the decolonization started with other groups of people. And then what happened is that this corporation of the American government kept it going. So that means that the American government will actually have no jurisdiction over you whatsoever. Whatsoever. They have to leave. That government has to get off the land. Unless you see otherwise. But that government has to, and is forced to, through the decolonization after 1960, has to get off of that land. Right? They have to leave that land. They have to move out of it. And see, what was supposed to happen when they were decolonizing Africa, they were decolonizing the islands, they were decolonizing Central America, they were decolonizing the places over there in India, they were decolonizing places over there in the Middle East, they were decolonizing all this stuff. The Americans, the Americas, including Canada, were supposed to decolonize as well. And they didn't do it. Right? They didn't do it. And the reason why they didn't do it is because you were accepting, the populace was accepting, they didn't know what they were right for, but they were accepting the terms and the agreements, a silent agreement, whether you knew it or not, you were accepting something that they were giving you to keep their rule over you. Plus, the war had never ended, because the war is still going on. So we have, and this is the reason why this fishbone structure of the indigenous nations of North America, and I say it that way because we have a lot of structures that are already in place, but we have to put them all together and bring us together as one. So if you are a descendant of Africa and you're a descendant of a slave, right? You could be an Aboriginal descendant of a slave. You could be an African descendant of a slave, and you came over here. You could be a prisoner of war, which if you're Aboriginal and you were placed in some sort of a jail, right? A war prisoner camp, and then you were taken over to a free labor camp along with the slaves. You guys were mixed up together. Then you had babies and all that other type stuff, right? So we're in this situation together. And the people of the islands need to understand that we're in it together, because a lot of people over there in the islands came from the North Americas, came from here. And there's a lot of people that ran into what we now call Mexico to try to get some freedom from this whole entire situation. And I would have to put a whole bunch of Californians in that as well, because there was a lot of they were battling the Calis all the way up until about 1880, 1890s. The last of the wars actually didn't end until like the 1920s, believe it or not. That's crazy. So we have the ending of the war, which will have to recreate the indigenous and Aboriginal people back to their own land. And then we have the process of decolonization, which will remove them from the land in itself, and anyone else that is of this land during that colonization period will then be able to claim their freedom as well. And then, only then, can we then trust the process of talking about compensation. Only then can we begin to talk about compensation. And that's reparation and recompense. And the reason why that is because now that we have total and complete freedom over ourselves, we're able to administer the remedy to ourselves. We know exactly what we need. And as a confederation, we all went into an agreement, a free will agreement of doing what is right for our own people. Articles of Confederation is what it is. Right? So we must come together as beings of people to make sure that we understand what we're doing for ourselves, and it's not just for our individual selves in our own little different pockets. We must not have what they put in place as a church mentality, but we must have a civilization type mentality, which is the mentality that we're in. Yes, of course, we as individuals have to be able to do what needs to be done to bring that source energy out of us, to bring our souls into fruition, to bring what we know that we can do into realization as individuals. And then as a collective, we need to take that collective energy of all of our carbon-based systems and what you would call melon-based systems, of our selenium-based systems, and bring that all together as collective and bring it into fruition. There will be nothing on earth that will be able to stop us, be able to bring us down, be able to make us move out of our way. This is the reason why I'm working with some very powerful people right now on the Decolonization Act. And I'm also doing a lot of things behind the scenes on wording about being able to bring this war to an end, right? And it's not only a war with the United States, because you need to know who your enemy is. It's a war that was perpetuated with a lot of other countries as well around the world. So again, when you begin to start talking about compensation, you begin to start talking reparations, you begin to start talking about a recompense, you have to also include the other countries that were involved in this mass slaughtering of over 100 million people of our people. And that's including a lot of African nations. And that also, unfortunately, includes the Moors. Because they were over here doing a lot of stuff with the people as they were slaughtering us in these wars, in this war. So that's what we have. We have the reestablishment of the system that we came out of developing a confederation, meaning an agreement amongst all of the nations that are sprouting up, big or small, with representation to go into a Aboriginal, well, I just call it a Grand Council. And the reason why it's great is because it is encompassing all of the parts that we are here in North America now today. Because we have to look at ourselves and what we are today, right here, right now. What we are now. Not what we were, because what we were has changed. And that's why I said we're establishing ourselves with some modifications to make sure whatever happened before doesn't happen again. And bringing our people into a situation as to where they can give the remedy of their own, give the solution of their own remedy to themselves, and not depending on the abuser to give them the remedy. So that's why if you don't end the war, there's absolutely no way for you to actually really be free or have real true decolonization or anything, because you're always going to be up underneath their system. So we have to have an understanding of what we're talking about, where we're going, what we're doing, as we're exhausting all these different remedies, like what the Kusa Nation is doing. As we're moving forward with a lot of these decolonization frameworks that's going in there. And it's hammering down all into one framework, so we're all one people. And when we're representing ourselves as all one people, right? Many flags, many nations, one flag. You can have whatever flag you want. Nobody's telling you not to be whatever you want to be. But in order for this civil war to come to an end and not get to a point where we're shooting, killing each other, which is you know, it's getting there. Because I'm seeing people getting really, really upset. They're attacking women. You know, they're beating the hell out of people on their internet sites, on their YouTube pages. People are getting threatened. Lives are being threatened now. I mean, it's escalating to a point as to where a lot of this hatred and infighting is directed at the wrong people. And again, being that we're in, and the reason why we're in this civil war is because we don't have any real control over ourselves and our situation, right? So if you're upset, out of control, you know, doing all kinds of stuff, and aren't able to really get with other peoples because you really don't have any real control over your inner self yet, and you don't have any control over the outer situations as a collective. And as a collective, we don't have any control over anything because we're all in jail. It's a bad situation. It's a bad situation. So this is the reason why we have to do what we have to do in terms of bringing ourselves in as a collective. There can't be any infighting. We don't have time for that. Right? There has to be the ending of a war. There has to be a decolonization process that has to take place. And then we have to talk about compensation, whether it be reparations, recompense, or whatever the terms may be. But unless that's done, what the system is going to do is they're going to put people above you to give the remedy they feel that you need. Right? So they'll give out $250,000 to everybody, and everybody's happy for now. So that's where we're at, people. We're in a civil war right now, in the beginnings of a civil war that is happening right now, while we're attacking each other, bringing each other down, and it doesn't have to be. Right? This is not about race. This is not about hating the white man or anything else. Like, what it's about is concentrating on ourselves, concentrating on yourselves, making sure that you are developing yourselves, and then as a collective we're developing ourselves and getting ourselves out of a system that is not conducive to who we are naturally as beings of people. And that's what it is. This is Ronnie McLean for Dark Matter Radio. And I'm glad that we were here today. I'm glad that you were able to listen to the show. We'll put this up on YouTube, and also, we'll try to put comments up. But again, let's put some comments up. A lot of people are threatening and stuff like that, other people. But stay peaceful with inside of yourselves. Make sure you stay in love with yourself, and make sure you stay in love with the collective. And we thank you for everything that you've done. We thank you for all your support and all the support out there, the college programs and community programs that we're putting out there. And we think about all those people who are thinking out and participating in the donation system that we're going on to help bring these projects and systems out to the people themselves. Again, this is Dark Matter Radio. Thank you for listening. This is Ronnie McLean. We'll catch you later. Peace.